Here's a complete voiceover script in a natural American storytelling voice written as if I'm recounting my own lived experience. It's built for a 30-40-minute YouTube video at 0.9x with a strong hook pattern, interrupts mid-video mini CTA, a central twist, vivid scenes, and a thought-provoking ending that invites debate. I keep the flow conversational with commas, dashes, and a few ellipses written as 4 dots. No stiff speechifying, no overdone line breaks. You ever had a grown man with a badge try to baptize you with a garden hose on your own porch? Like you were a stray, he could shoo off his lawn like you were a problem. He could wash away with cold water and a smirk. Like dignity doesn't belong to you unless he says so. If it were you, what would you have done? Would you have screamed, or would you have smiled and promised a storm was coming? Because that's exactly what I did. I stood there dripping in a brand new dress, and I told him quietly he had no idea what he'd just started. It was a Saturday that looked harmless. Warm light sliding across white trim and rose bushes. The kind of afternoon where you catch yourself breathing slower. Because peace feels possible, because for once the world isn't asking you to prove anything. I had just moved into my place in Oakwood Estates, that little pocket of tidy lawns, and measured silence, a 2-story with a porch I'd pictured 1,000 times, and a door I had dreamed of unlocking for years. I was wearing a black sheath dress with tiny white flowers, not fancy, just mine, a small celebration of the long road that brought me to a set of keys and a mortgage with my name on it. The hose hit my siding like a slap, hard and careless, the sound out of place in all that quiet, and when I looked left, I saw him crew-cut thick neck cargo shorts, a small badge clipped to his belt, like a promise and a threat. Officer Frank Miller, the realtor, had said with a careful grin when I signed the papers, "Territorial but helpful, keeps the neighborhood safe." You know that tone people use when they're trying to warn you without saying the thing out loud? Yeah, that tone. He stared at me the way some people look at a car they don't think belongs on their street, slow from hair to heels, not curious, not friendly, just taking inventory to see which box to put me in. "Didn't think they were letting your kind move in here," he said. Voice low, lazy, aimed to carry just far enough to be heard and be deniable. I felt my spine draw itself up like a measuring stick, not because I was surprised, but because I've met that sentence before in uniforms and suits and name tags and folded arms across too many counters. I must have missed that line in the HOA. "Bylaws," I told him. Warm smile gone voice level. My realtor probably skipped the part about neighborhood race quotas. His eyes narrowed like I'd stepped onto a stage he thought he owned. He jerked his chin toward my moving truck and said it was quiet around here. Orderly, no loud music, no late-night traffic, and understanding. He didn't say the whole sentence, he didn't have to. The implication sat down on the grass between us and crossed its legs. "I like quiet," I said. "That's why I bought the house," and I reached for my door, like the conversation had ended like adults do when a neighbor starts mistaking his proximity for authority. "Hey," he barked the way you'd call to a dog you don't respect. "I'm talking to you." I stopped with my hand on the knob and looked back over my shoulder. "And I answered you," I said. "Is there something else?" His face blotched up the way anger blooms when entitlement gets touched. He picked up the hose thumb on the nozzle, and I heard the water hiss like it was rehearsing. "Yeah," he said, voice dropping heavy. "You need to learn some respect for law enforcement around here when I talk. You listen." I told him I respect the law, I don't respect bullies who hide behind it. And that was it. That was the match to his little powder keg. He squeezed the trigger, and a hard, cold jet hit me square in the chest, punched the air out of my lungs, soaked the dress I had picked for myself, white flowers bleeding into black, until the whole thing looked like a bruise. Water ran down my hair, my face, my shoulders pooling on the welcome mat I had bought 2 days earlier, and he stood there panting proud like he'd put out a fire. There he said, smug and satisfied, "Maybe that'll cool you off, now you know who's in charge." He waited for me to cry or to scream or to run inside and lock the door and shrink. Instead, I pushed a wet strand of hair behind my ear, stood straight, looked down at the dress that now told a different story, and then looked him in the eye. "You have no idea what you've just done," I said, not loud, not shaky, just honest. He laughed, that ugly, barked laugh men use when they think the rules will always bend for them. The water kept running out of the nozzle like a little silver ribbon of contempt, and I went inside, and when the lock clicked, it sounded small and final, like the cocking of a hammer. Pattern interrupt. I did not cry. I documented. That's my rule. Emotion can be used against you. Records can't. So I changed into sweats. Took my personal phone, not my work phone, and I took pictures of everything. The wet dress laid flat with the flowers bleeding like ink, the puddles on the porch, and the hardwood just inside the streak of water on the white railing, and through the window a zoomed-in shot of Officer Hydrangea with his hose and his smirk. I opened a note and wrote a memo to myself, time-stamped exact words, gestures, distance between us, the way his tone dropped at the end, like he wanted the threat to land, because details matter when you're telling the truth, and a liar is waiting to call it drama. I made tea I didn't drink, sat at my kitchen table, and felt the anger settle into something sharper. Panic is a luxury you hand to your enemy like a gift bag, and I don't give gifts to men like him. If it were you, what would you have done in that moment? Would you have called a friend, called a lawyer, called the news, or would you have done what I did, breathe, write plan, and let it sharpen you? Tell me in the comments. I'm genuinely curious what your first move would feel like on your own porch. By morning, there was a ticket tucked under my windshield wiper, obstructing a scenic view, my car and my own driveway, apparently blocking the sunlight from his hydrangeas. And yeah, I paid it online. Not because I believed it, but because I wasn't going to give him the sidewalk scene he wanted. Later, during a conference call that required quiet and focus, and my full self, he rolled up in his cruiser Siren, blasting a solid half-minute, parked in front of his house, stretched like a man satisfied with a job well done, and went inside. The silence after the siren felt worse, like someone holding a hand over your mouth and smiling while they do it. He interrogated my movers in the street about their permits. My sister got pulled over 2 blocks away, bringing me a plant and cookies. My newspaper started going missing, and sometimes late a flashlight beam skimmed across my bedroom windows, slow and deliberate, like a lighthouse looking for a shipwreck that looked suspiciously like me. Pattern interrupt. I did not take the bait. I built a case. I installed a security system that belonged in a casino, cameras tucked and angled to see everything that belonged to me, time stamps tight, night vision, clear one lens, with a perfect, unobstructed view of Frank Miller's kingdom across the property line. I didn't announce it. I didn't need to. The point wasn't to scare him. The point was to know. And in the evenings, I reviewed footage the way a coach reviews game tape, frame by frame, behavior by behavior. And what I saw wasn't random, it was choreography. He liked to polish his cruiser when my blinds were open, slow circles on the hood, head tilting, as if glare could tell him if I was afraid, yet he liked to stand on his lawn arms, crossed, while a neighbor named Henderson wrung his hands and glanced at my windows during a conversation he clearly wanted no part of. You can read a lot in body language even from 30 feet away. It was bigger than a hose, and a ticket bigger than a man with a chip on his shoulder and a badge on his belt. It smelled like a system, the kind that thrives in silence and calls itself safety. So I did something boring and powerful. I went to public records, court filings, citations, outcomes. The stuff they tell you is tedious until you realize it's where the story lives without spin. One by one, they look like nothing. A traffic stop here, a disorderly there, a charge dismissed with a judge's note that makes you tilt your head, but taped to a wall with colored lines connecting addresses and dates and surnames, it starts to shout. I saw clusters, Bayside, the River District, Westgate neighborhoods with long family histories and tight blocks and churches that ring on Sundays, neighborhoods with developers circling and calling it revitalization neighborhoods, where tickets gained weight in stacks, where patrol cars rested near corner stores like props in a play. Everyone was tired of watching. You ever looked at a map and felt it accuse you? Because that's what it felt like, the pins crowding those blocks. And a few months after a burst of citations and stops and late-night visits, a sale below market, quick, clean, gone. If you've seen that in your city, type the neighborhood in the comments. Make it real for other people reading this, because folks will swear it's coincidence until they see the pattern and then they can't unsee it. Paper tells part of the truth, people tell the rest. That's how I found Sarah Jenkins, a paralegal with a small office that smelled like printer toner and strong coffee and stubborn hope. She ran a little community group that punched above its funding. We met at a coffee shop halfway between Oakwood Estates and the neighborhoods where tickets cluster like storm clouds. And she looked at me the way people from the trenches look at someone from the hills, cautious, measuring, a little tired. Another concerned citizen from the estates, she said. Not mean just honest property values got you spooked. I shook my head and said I was concerned about my neighbor, Officer Frank Miller, and the air changed. Her eyes sharpened, the cynicism left like smoke through a crack in the window. What did he do? She asked, and I told her the words and the water and the flashlight and the privacy he kept trying to rob me of in the name of order. She nodded with this grim little smile people get when the rerun plays again. The hose is new, she said. The rest is his playbook. She opened a worn leather folder and spread notes and affidavits and emails, the stories that don't get news segments because they lack fireworks. The Martinez family who lost their car to impounds. They could never catch up on a straight-A kid whose scholarship evaporated because a loitering arrest outside his own house left a stain that wouldn't wash out an elderly woman whose son sat in a cell because of drugs that materialized during a routine stop and disappeared from the narrative when it counted. We put her stories on my map, we added color codes, we circled dates, we pulled property records I could access because I know where to ask and how to read the language of shell companies. And there it was, the buyer of record wasn't a person, it was an LLC. And the LLCs were controlled by a single law firm with a single heavy client in development, Pinnacle Development Group. If that name means anything where you live, you already know why my stomach went cold. We checked their board, their contributions, the photos taken at banquets where applause is easy, and there he was, Marcus Thorne, CEO, all smiles and cufflinks on the fundraising committee for the police association, sitting shoulder to shoulder with the city's police chief, David Thompson, the same man who likes microphones and words like integrity and partnership. The distance between a condo tower and a court appearance can be less than the width of a check, and folks will still tell you it's a coincidence. Pattern interrupt. I kept digging anyway. If you knew that much, would you go to the press right then or keep pulling the thread, waiting for the sweater to unravel where everyone can see it? Do you think it's fair for developers to sit that close to the people who police the very neighborhoods they want to buy into cheap? I want to hear you on that, because the line between influence and control gets slippery when money buys the grease. The system noticed us noticing. One of Sarah's witnesses stopped returning calls, then another. Then a mother spoke through a mail slot, because opening the door felt like a risk she couldn't afford, and she said that Officer Miller had come by and hinted that her other son might have an accident if she kept talking. Threats don't have to be shouted. To be deafening fear will translate a whisper into a siren. We decided to run a small play old school bait. A brag out of him with a wire and a park bench set the meeting for Saturday sunset. A gazebo that looked safe and neutral and photogenic. A place where bullies like to pretend they're just concerned citizens. 2 nights before that, they raided Sarah's office, a warrant neat and airtight on the surface, an anonymous tip too clean to chase, and a bag of pills in her desk like a magic trick. No one could prove in the moment. They put her in cuffs and charged her on the evening news. And the chief himself stood in front of cameras and said how sad it was when so-called activists poisoned their own communities. They seized everything, every note, every map, every timeline. Our whole investigation stuffed into evidence boxes, with labels written by the same hands that had been writing tickets for fun. I didn't sleep much that night, and I called a lawyer who knows the sound a frame-up makes. And he knew it, but knowing isn't the same as undoing. In the morning, because he can't help himself, Frank washed his cruiser slow in the exact slice of driveway framed by my front windows, whistling like a man who owns the song. Pattern interrupt. That's when the story flips. Here's the twist, and yeah, it changes everything. I am not only a quiet neighbor who likes roses and peace and a good late afternoon light on a white porch rail. I am also Imani Washington's senior advisor to the governor of this state. My job is to see how power moves and to move it back when it wanders. And up to that point, I had been careful not to pull rank because I wanted to see if the tools available to a regular citizen would be honored by the men who love to say no one is above the law. He taught me the answer. So I picked up my secure phone. Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. I drove to the Capitol and sat in a secure room with Governor Hayes and the head of the State Bureau of Investigation, and I didn't bring outrage. I brought receipts. I laid the story out in a line they could follow with their eyes closed, the hose and the tickets and the late-night flashlight. The clusters of stops and the below-market sales, the LLCs and the law firm, and the pinnacle board photo with the chief's smile frozen next to money that talks. They have become a law unto themselves, I said. Calm, because calm travels farther than a shout. They are using the badge like a lever for a private land grab, and they believe they are untouchable. We can use that belief to open the door. We didn't kick the door in because smashing is satisfying and sloppy loses trials. We built a gambit, elegant, targeted, plausible enough to attract greed and arrogance, fake enough to be safe. The governor's office announced a state-funded community revitalization grant, $10 million earmarked for historically underserved neighborhoods, and the map in the press release lit up Bayside, the River District Westgate, the same blocks where our pins had crowded the paper. It looked real because we know how real looks the paperwork, the logos, the timelines, the quotes about equitable growth and shared prosperity, and it hit like good news because people want to believe in good news, especially where they live. We let a careful rumor reach Frank that I was considering applying to administer the grant through a new nonprofit, which would make me effectively a gatekeeper. I took a call on my porch where I knew he would see me working. The words steering committee, oversight, community advisory board. All the phrases men like him roll their eyes at until they realize those phrases stand between them and their payday. 3 days later, he strolled up to the property line wearing a neighborly concern he had borrowed for the occasion and suggested the chief might be willing to help me navigate the red tape, a friendly sit-down guidance discretion. We set a meeting for the next evening at the gazebo in the community park, public enough to seem safe, quiet enough to feel private, perfect for men who prefer plausible deniability to conscience. That afternoon, our team set the stage, state agents disguised as city workers, and a couple on a picnic blanket, placed the toys, a pinhole camera in the gazebo wood. Long-range mics nested where leaves can hide small truths, eyes on paths and benches, and the spots you never notice until they matter. I checked the encrypted earpiece tucked by my hair, breathed, looked at myself in the mirror. A woman tired of being reasonable with unreasonable men. Then I walked to the park as the sky cooled from gold to violet. Chief David Thompson stood in the gazebo, tall, silver hair smile like a polished door that opens only one way, Frank close behind him, like a bulldog who knows whose hand holds the leash. "Ms. Washington," the chief said, shaking my hand, "thank you for meeting Frank. Tells me you're the driving force behind this grant idea." He gestured at a bench like I should sit. I stayed, standing. It changes the gravity of a conversation. "I'm one of several stakeholders. I said I want what's best for the community." He nodded and moved quickly to Pinnacle. How much good they had done, how dangerous it is to scare off investment with messy public processes. How well-positioned Pinnacle was to deploy funds efficiently if we partnered, and I let him talk, because microphones love uninterrupted sentences. How would the grant be mismanaged, I asked, keeping my voice like glass. Frank couldn't help himself. He said, "Money in the wrong hands complicates property values, better to let professionals handle development." And I asked if he meant improve neighborhoods by forcing families out of their homes with harassment and threats, and constant police presence until selling cheap feels like self-defense. His face went red. The chief held up a hand to hush him, and the smile slipped a little, revealing the tool beneath it. "Let's be direct," he said. "You're new, you don't understand how things work. This grant is a problem. We need you to recommend a partnership with Pinnacle so the funds can be used properly. We can ensure a consulting fee finds its way to your nonprofit. Everyone wins." He paused, and then he added, "The part they always pretend they didn't say. Obstacles get removed. Ask your friend Sarah a shame about her drug problem. Silence is a blade." And I let it cut a clean line through the air. The microphones drank it down, because arrogance loves to hear itself. Then I said what needed saying. "So my choices are, join your conspiracy or be destroyed like you destroyed Sarah." The chief shrugged. The "I didn't say it, but I said it" shrug, and Frank stepped closer, voice low, promising code violations at my new house, maybe another friend with a problem they didn't know about yet. "We own this town," he said. "You are nothing." I reached into my blazer and took out my wallet, flipped it open, not to my license, to my credential. "My name is Imani Washington," I said. "Steady and clear, I am senior advisor to Governor Hayes, and this revitalization grant you're so worried about does not exist. I invented it 3 days ago to get you both comfortable enough to confess to conspiracy, extortion, and obstruction of justice. Everything you have said for the last 10 minutes has been recorded as part of a state investigation." The color left the chief's face like someone opened a drain. Frank's mouth fell open. The maintenance worker put down a rake and picked up a radio. The picnic couple stood, and their jackets unzipped. And just then, 2 unmarked sedans rolled up soft to the curb doors, opening like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence. "Officer Miller, I said your harassment campaign against me has been captured from multiple angles. Chief Thompson, your financial ties to Pinnacle and your role in framing Sarah Jenkins are already under subpoena. This conversation will be the reason your lawyers advise you to stop talking." Frank tried to form the word. "You like it was going to do some work for him." The rest of the sentence collapsed. "Checkmate," I said, because sometimes a single word is the whole story. They didn't fight it. Men like that believe in the rules right up until the moment a bigger rule enters the room and asks for their hands. The agents were calm the way people are when they know they own the clock. And the field cuffs came out, rights were read, the chief tried to sprinkle context on his own confession, and the microphones didn't care. Mics love content, not excuses. The footage was solid, The audio was clean, the paper trail had threads long enough to knit a sweater for a jury. The city woke up to push alerts, and all day the audio ran on a loop. Obstacles get removed, generous consulting fee. We own this town, words people had suspected for years, but never heard in one smooth slice like that. And the house of cards folded fast. Marcus Thorne did what men like him do when smoke gets inside the tuxedo. He handed over emails and calendars and receipts that put names next to deeds. A prosecutor resigned. A judge recused. A web that had felt invisible started to shine under the kind of light that burns. It wasn't everything, it never is, but it was a start so big it felt like a chapter break. Sarah walked out of jail the next day, charges dismissed with a speed that told the truth better than any press conference could. The crowd waiting outside sounded like the first deep breath after you've held it too long. Donations poured into her organization, volunteers lined up around the block, and we had to set schedules and fold tables in cold water, because when fear cracks, hope rushes in and brings friends. A town hall packed the high school auditorium. People stood and told stories they'd been saving for years. The Martinez family got their car back. The straight-A kid got a scholarship, fund named in his honor, a neighbor I'd only seen as nervous before. Mr. Henderson shook my hand and said, "Thank you," like he was practicing using his voice again. I sat in the back because I wanted to be a neighbor, not a headline. And when Sarah said, "Power isn't a badge or a title, power is truth," and the courage to speak it, the room stood up and the sound felt like healing. My house got quiet again. Not the brittle quiet you keep because you're scared to wake a thin-skinned tyrant, but the soft quiet you choose, the kind you can read a book in, the kind that lets you nap on the couch, while the late light makes patterns on the floor. I replaced the dress and kept the ruined one folded on the back of a shelf, like a warning label and a trophy at the same time, because sometimes we need artifacts to remind us what not to tolerate. The roses kept blooming, neighbors started waving without checking who was watching, and the sidewalk felt less like a stage and more like a path. Now, I want to ask you something that isn't simple. Was the trap fair? Is building a fiction to catch a larger truth crossing a line? Or is it the only way to unmask people who welded themselves to power and started calling it virtue? Do the ends justify the means, when the means are lies aimed at liars who have been lying with badges and budgets for years? If it were you, would you have done what I did, or would you have chosen a different fight, and why? Say it out loud in the comments. Argue with me. Argue with each other respectfully. Because the point here isn't that one sting fixed a city. The point is that a community remembered. It has a voice, and that voice can travel. Here's what I know. Most courage is not cinematic. It's administrative. It's taking a photo and writing down the time. It's paying a stupid ticket because the sidewalk scene isn't your win condition. It's filing a public records request and taping the pages to a wall. It's installing a camera and letting the truth do what truth does. When you shine enough light on it, it's meeting a stranger in a coffee shop and turning 2 folders into a map. It's refusing to give men like Frank the gift of your panic. Quiet strength wins more fights than shouting. You know what I mean. And yeah, that happened. A man tried to wash me off my own welcome mat and ended up washed out of a uniform by his own mouth. I'll leave you with this, and I want you to respond. What part of this story hit you the hardest? The hose on the porch, the late-night flashlight, the raid on Sarah, the gazebo, reveal the town hall where people finally spoke without waiting for permission. And what do you think about the ethics of the sting, smart move, or slippery slope, necessary deception, or dangerous precedent? Share your take. Disagree if you need to. Tell me a time you stood your ground, or a time you wish you had, or a time a neighbor surprised you by showing up when you were out of breath. If this story lit a small fire in you, pass it to someone who needs heat. Subscribe for more true stories of everyday justice and the ordinary bravery it takes to get there, and keep talking to each other down there in the comments. Because the only way stories like this turn into change where you live is if you keep the conversation alive and refuse to let anyone with a hose, a title, or a checkbook tell you to hush.